Hello, my name is Parminder Raina. I am the Scientific Director of the McMaster Institute for Research in Aging. We call it MIRA in short. I'm delighted to welcome you all to the inaugural Suzanne Labarge Lecture in Aging, which is hosted by MIRA. Before I start present a few words, I would like to take an opportunity to recognize and acknowledge that our event today takes place on the traditional territory shared between the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and Anishinaabe nations. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, is within the lands protected by Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement, and is directly adjacent to Haldimand Treaty territory. The wampum uses the symbolism of a dish to represent the territory, and one spoon to represent that people are to share the resources of the land and only take what they need. We must acknowledge a debt to those who were here before us and recognize our responsibility as guests to respect and honor the intimate relationship Indigenous people have to this land. McMaster Institute for Research on Aging works to optimize the health and longevity of Canada's aging population through leading-edge research, education, stakeholder collaboration, while upholding the values of integrity, excellence, collaboration, inclusivity, and transparency. MIRA stands as a testament to the vision and investment of Suzanne Labarge. The Institute has become a cornerstone of McMaster University's commitment to aging research and is instrumental in mobilizing that research to maximize impact. Our work is ambitious in addressing critical societal challenges through interdisciplinary research and meaningful community engagement. Both of these aims are interwoven in today's events and are pivotal in addressing the complex challenges faced by older adults. MIRA achieves its success through dedicated research centers, including MIRA Dixon Hall Center in Toronto's downtown east, led by Dr. Marla Beauchamp, who's sitting here in the front row, and the Labarge Center for Mobility and Aging, and through the dedication of the Institute staff, researchers, trainees, and our committed community members and partners, many of whom are here today. This is a first for me. I'm terrible at reading off the paper, so I'm doing really well today, right? Yes. We have made significant strides in the past 10 years since we were established. MIRA is at the forefront of aging research spheres in many areas, from collaboration with the World Health Organization to enhance the global understanding of mobility as we age, to hosting experts from all over the world for an international consensus meeting on wearable measuring mobility in aging populations. Through projects and initiatives at the MIRA Dixon Hall Center, MIRA is laying the groundwork for improving the lives of disadvantaged older adults in our communities. Today, I'm thrilled to be hosting our inaugural Suzanne Labarge Lecture in Aging, and I offer a warm welcome to Suzanne, who is with us today, and I would like to also welcome our distinguished guest, Dr. Karim Khan, who is the Scientific Director of CIHR Institute of Musculoskeletal Health. He's right up front here. Dr. Katie Sibley from University of Manitoba. Katie is somewhere here. And also, we were supposed to have Dr. Jane Rylett, Scientific Director of CIHR Institute of Aging, but she came down with a flu or something yesterday, so she decided not to come in. And finally, I would also like to take some time to thank our MIRA Executive Committee, members who are able to join us today. Doctors Jennifer Hayes, she's sitting here. Dr. Ada Tang, somewhere in the crowd here. Michael Surratt, Milena Head, and Michelle Grignon. In addition to that, we have Dr. Dina Brooks, who has joined us, and Dr. Jonathan Bramson in the back from the senior leadership from the Faculty of Health Sciences. Now I would like to turn the podium over to Dr. Paul O'Byrne, Dean and Vice President of the Faculty of Health Sciences. Paul?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rayner. Good afternoon, everyone. It really is an immense pleasure and privilege to welcome you all today to introduce the inaugural Suzanne Labarge Lecture in Aging. Named for our Chancellor Emerita and McMaster alumna, Dr. Suzanne Labarge, who's joined us this afternoon, this prestigious lecture series invites academics, clinicians, and members of the public to join us in celebrating advancements in aging research. Now, we would not be here today as a group if it wasn't for the vision and the commitment of Suzanne Labarge. A member of the Order of Canada and former Vice Chair of the Royal Bank of Canada, Suzanne Labarge has a long history of supporting aging research at McMaster, including generous donations exceeding $42 million dedicated to enhancing the lives of older adults in Canada and around the world. In 2007, Suzanne established the Raymond and Margaret Labarge Chair in Research and Knowledge Application for Optimal Aging, in honor of her parents. She made a transformational gift to the Faculty of Health Sciences for the Labarge Optimal Aging Initiative in 2012, supporting the development of the McMaster Optimal Aging Portal, which is a free online resource that takes complex information about aging and presents it in easy to understand language. In 2016, Suzanne funded the creation of the Center for Mobility in Aging, housed within the newly formed McMaster Institute for Research in Aging, or MIRA. The MIRA Dixon Hall Center, a unique partnership between the Institute and Dixon Hall, which is a multi-service agency focused on addressing poverty, social injustice, and isolation across the lifespan in Toronto's downtown east, was funded through gifts from Suzanne in 2021. Her latest investment in 2024 will help MIRA leverage existing research programs and engage in developing innovative programs to better understand how the aging brain affects body function as we age. I also would like to acknowledge the continuing support of McMaster's senior leadership in driving MIRA's success by supporting and championing the initiatives and endeavors supported by your gift, Suzanne. Over the past 10 years, with these generous gifts, we've not only been able to build the foundation necessary to execute and disseminate research in aging and mobility, but we've also built a home for innovative aging research here at McMaster. This home is now the flagship Aging Research Institute at McMaster, recognized nationally and internationally. It houses the spirit of interdisciplinarity and a strong sense of community engagement. Here we prioritize meaningful engagement with end users, including policymakers, caregivers, older adults, and support the future of aging research through our valued trainees. Today's inaugural lecture honors Suzanne Labarge's longstanding support and contributions to aging research at McMaster University and the McMaster Institute for Research on Aging. To be held annually, this prestigious lecture series will host and support visits from distinguished researchers from Canada and abroad who are conducting innovative and interdisciplinary research in aging. The lecture aims to foster interdisciplinary research and collaboration to optimize the longevity and well-being of Canada's aging population. On behalf of McMaster University's leadership, Suzanne Labarge, I extend our deepest gratitude for all your continuing vision and your continuing generosity. Thank you, Suzanne. And I now want to turn the stage over to Dr. Marla Beauchamp, Director of MIRA Dixon Hall Center, who will introduce our extraordinarily gifted and talented speaker this afternoon. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I also want to welcome, we had such a great turnout today, and I recognize in the audience many members, research participants of the Canadian Longitudinal Study on Aging and the McMaster Monitoring My Mobility Study, MAC-M3. So welcome and thank you very much for coming out. So I have the honor of introducing our speaker today, and our first inaugural Suzanne Labarge Lectureship. So I'm so pleased to be here, especially as a researcher focused on mobility and aging and fall prevention. I could not be happier to welcome Dr. Stephen Lord. So Professor Stephen Lord is a Senior Principal Research Fellow at Neuroscience Research Australia and Scientia Professor at the University of New South Wales in Sydney. He has published I actually had to add to his bio because the bio he sent us was way too modest and only had a couple sentences. So he has published over 600 papers in the area of balance and fall prevention. And as someone who does research in this area, we have cited him many times. So we're very pleased for him to be here today. He is sort of the rock star of fall prevention research. As the director of the Fall, Balance, and Injury Research Center, Dr. Lord is world-renowned for his research on balance, gait, and falls in older people. And his work has really influenced the landscape of what we do in terms of fall prevention strategies in older people, and it's been adopted all over the world. So in today's lecture, Dr. Lord will discuss the utility of wearable sensors for improving fall prediction and the efficacy of technology-based interventions for falls, and then how we can make this research accessible to older people and used to inform policy and practice. So I would like to extend my deepest welcome to Dr. Stephen Lord. Please come on up. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Marla, and for everybody. It's a privilege and a great honor to be here today in Hamilton. It's really a wonderful honor to be giving the Suzanne Labarge Lecture, and I'm extremely delighted that Suzanne's here in the front row to listen. So no pressure. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today, my talk is in three parts. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do at MIRA at the University of New South Wales to begin with. I'm then going to talk about the current evidence about what we know in terms of fall prevention, and to finish up with what that means here and now. So we've got this evidence. What can we do if we've got this evidence to prevent falls from a personal and a policy perspective? But I'll start up with just this basic question of what is a fall? There was debate about this, and you can imagine a few consensus conferences, but basically it's all incidents that lead to a person going from an upright position to falling onto the ground. There are lots of reasons this can happen. We can trip, we can slip, we can lose our balance, we can faint. But in terms of falls research, we take them all into account, and we're trying to understand all of the reasons why this may happen, because all of these types of occurrences can lead to an injury and also a loss of confidence. So who falls? So when it comes to older people, it's about 1 in 3. So if people are 65 and over, there's 1 chance in 3 of having a fall, and about half the people who do so fall 2 or 3 times in a year. So a fall is a predictor of more, so it's a flag for trying to prevent falls. It gets to 1 in 2 in people aged 85 and over. So they're serious events. And who falls? Well, this is interesting. We've got a comment in Australia. Falls don't discriminate. There are lots of, or everybody is subject to the risk of falling. The fellow in the middle of this slide is one of our consumer advocates, and he is really working with us to bring about the fact that everyone is at risk of falling. Falls don't discriminate, and preventing falls is everybody's business. And one of the ways we're looking at this in Australia is to try to get this message back on the government's initiative. And we've got all the help of some celebrities and people who've had a fall who are very happy to work with us to say, I'm would like to be an advocate for fall prevention. And that includes people like celebrity chefs and actors and so on. So it's a way of trying to promote the message. I won't go into all of this, but just to give an indication of the size of the problem, the graph on the left shows injuries related to falls as the big tall bar, and you can see it dwarfs all other injuries. That's motor vehicle accidents, pedestrian accidents, burns, all sorts of other incidents. Falls is key, so it's it definitely dwarfs all other injuries in older people. The other call to action that we're making in Australia is to try and get the attention of government and policymakers by just indicating, with the ageing of the Australian population, and I'm sure it's the same in Canada, we're going to go from 41,000 people hospitalised from a fall to 60,000 by 2041. Deaths are going to go up. We're going to need lots of ambulance call-outs and some staggering statistics that if you get admitted to hospital because of a fall, it's double the risk of being admitted to a residential care setting compared to every other diagnosis for coming in. So it's a key issue. It sounds like a commonplace event, but it's very significant in terms of health care. So what are the types of falls? And this is a pie chart here that breaks falls down into various categories. And you can see by the sectors of the pie, the biggest one is a trip. So these are people who trip outside on an obstacle, some sort of surface, slip, although slips might be more important in Canada, I think, particularly when I was in Toronto last week in the snowstorm to see all of the ice and snow. So slips in Canada may be bigger than the sector of the pie here. A loss of balance. So also people just doing transfers, getting up, moving from a chair, etc., losing balance and falling. So they make up about 3/4 of all falls. So they're neuromuscular in their causes. There are other falls relating to feeling faint and dizziness or not being sure. But, if we're going to address this issue, we really need to look at the mobility aspects to improve people's balance, their ability to react appropriately to avoid a fall. So if we do that, a key way to do this is through exercise. And this is where mobility comes into play. And I'm going to just briefly go through some systematic review evidence and summarise this to give the key messages to what we know from many, many trials now of exercise that have been put in place to address mobility and prevent falls. So this systematic review and meta-analysis was led by a colleague of mine who was actually out here 1 year ago, Professor Kathy Sherrington, and she has led many of these over time, and really we now have a very good picture of what are the key ingredients for fall prevention in exercise programs. For example, in this systematic review, there were 99 comparisons, so 1 off the 100, 88 trials, and nearly 20,000 people. So with that body of evidence, we can come to some firm conclusions. And this is all the trials. There are so many, you can hardly make sense of it all now on the one graph, but there's a vertical line down the middle, a few little dots and some horizontal lines. And what that basically shows is most of those little dots are to the left of the vertical line. That means exercise is working. And when you sum that up and take a single statistic from that, the relative risk is 0.79, which means that those who take part in exercise, there's a 21% reduction in the risk of falls. Very significant. We know because there are so many trials. most of the trials working in the same direction, that we can be clear exercise programs work in preventing falls. So that's one thing, but what type of exercise? So the next part of this process was to do what's called a meta-regression and try and tease out the essential components. And one of the items we looked at was the intensity of the balance component. And so this is a little bit hard to define, but how we looked at it was a program that was at good intensity for balance involved standing. So that's a critical factor. So exercises in a seated position is not going to improve balance, but more so, you needed to move your body, move the center of mass. You had to narrow the base of support where you place your feet, minimize your upper limb support, and start taking some dynamic exercises while you're on your feet, like stepping and challenging balance. The other item that came from this was the dose, and it indicated that the exercise programs that were prescribed 3 or more times a week were the ones that had the maximal benefit. So it's what's in the program in terms of balance and making sure people do enough of it. And this little figure here is a simplified version that looks at the two extremes. So on the left there, we've got the reduction where there's a low challenge to balance and less than 3 hours of a dose per week. And you can see there's a 10% reduction in falls only. That's not significant. However, if we go to the optimal program, we've got moderate to high challenge to balance. We've got a sufficient dose. We've got nearly a 40% reduction. So that's starting to become very significant. So from all of those trials, they are the two key elements that come from it. So clearly now we need to get balance training into our exercise programs and make sure people do a sufficient amount of it. So some of the ways that we can go about challenging balance is through step training. I mentioned earlier that tripping and slipping are key factors in fall risk. Stepping is what we need to do to avoid such falls. We need to be able to take steps to avoid obstacles, and if we hit an obstacle, we need to be able to react quickly and appropriately to avoid falling over. So if we directly train stepping, maybe that's going to be really quite task specific for fall prevention. So rather than just exercise, it's kind of like fall avoidance training. So we've looked at this in a couple of ways at MIRA, and I'll explain one of the trials that we recently completed. It was a trial of exergames and also cognitive training to see if these two interventions could prevent falls. And this was published early last year. So basically what it involved was, we called it Smart Step. And we did this because we thought it's training, but it's also going to be training the brain. And in fact, we had 3 arms in this study altogether. We had a seated program where people sat at a desk and played computer games that involved a series of tasks. We had exactly the same intervention, but instead of people seated at a desk playing their hands on a keyboard, people were playing the games with their feet. So they were basically stepping and dancing on a mat. And to do this trial and have it sufficiently powered for falls as an outcome, we needed 750 people. So it's a big trial and it took 5 years to do. So 250 people went into the seated training, 250 people went into the exercise step mat training, and we had 250 people who served as controls. So it was 1 year, and we provided these facilities to people to do this in their own homes, and the fundamental outcome measure was whether these two programs could prevent falls in that year. We also wanted to look to see if these exercise programs could improve physical function, cognitive function. In a subset, we did some scans to see what happened to the brain. And then we wanted to see if it was cost effective, because clearly that's important. If this program works, we need to know how much it's going to cost and how much will, save for each fall. So this is what it looks like. I'll show a video in a moment, but you can see on the top left, you've got a person seated at a table looking at a computer screen. They've got a nice ergonomic touchpad, and they're playing all of the games. And they have all sorts of elements that are useful for keeping the brain active, like response inhibition, selective attention, visuospatial planning and processing. So you've got to just judge spatial relationships, and set shifting. So being able to change from doing one thing to another. Now the step mat games, the exergames, same games exactly, have all of those cognitive components, but they also challenge balance. You need to be able to step accurately and respond quickly. So it's exactly the same program, exactly the same dose. One group's playing the games seated, the other are playing the games while they're on the mat. And these were the types of games we devised. So a number of you might know some of them. We had games like Step Mania, which is Dance Dance Revolution, Tetris, La Cucaracha, Space Invaders, Frogger. We had all of these games that are good fun to do, and all of the games that we involved had the principles of gaming, so we wanted to make them addictive and fun. So there were high scores, best scores, gold medals for playing the game, so we could get people hopefully to their targets of 120 hours per week, 120 minutes per week, not 120 hours. That would be a high dose. 120 minutes per week. They are also designed so they could start at easy, moderate, hard, expert, and people accrued more points for going up the grades and playing for longer. So there's a little video here that gives you a feel for what it was like, if I can find it. And this is the little video we gave to our participants so they knew what they were in for before they joined up. So it's a simple mat we could provide to people. They could put it in their living rooms, a study. They could play on with the TV, or they could play on a computer screen if they preferred. So the person's stepping in response to what he's seeing in the screen. This is the brain training group. It's very much the same as the mat. It's just designed a little bit better so it's easier to move among the arrows with the hands. So the type of games people played, they looked at these and they responded with their feet or their hands. This is Dance Dance Revolution. You step on the arrow when it coincides with the target arrow. You would step or step and hold. There could be bombs for inhibition. Tetris was rather popular. In fact, people played too much Tetris. They liked manipulating the blocks. You'd step to the left and right to move the blocks down and to make rows. Cucaracha was also popular. People had to step on the cockroach, avoid the butterfly and the cactus. So there was inhibition, stepping in all directions, forward, back, to the side. I quite like Greek Village. You walk around a Greek village collecting these gold coins, stepping aside, hard right to turn right, avoiding obstacles. It gets faster and faster till you die. I had to have Space Invaders in. This is my youth. And basically, again, stepping side to side, behind the walls, coming out to shoot the aliens as they advance. And Anaconda's the other example. You need to eat the source food. Each time you have one, your tail grows longer and your tail becomes harder and harder to avoid until you strike it. Again, that's the end of the game. So that's what we devised, 120 minutes for 12 months, and the control group had usual care, life as normal. So I won't go into this too much other than to say it was a standard randomized control trial. So we recruited people, we did baseline testing, we then randomized them into the three groups. We did rolled out the program in people's homes. We had a hotline and a couple of visits to make sure people could play them properly. We did reassessments at 6 months and followed up for falls for a full year as a classic sort of design. And I'm going to go straight to the main result here. It worked. So the STEP training program produced a 26% significant reduction in falls. So that was very, very encouraging that this would work. People could embrace the technology, use it at home, play it sufficiently over the year, and it resulted in fewer falls. Interestingly, the brain training group, there's about half the reduction which was of interest. It didn't make statistical significance in the primary analysis, but if we looked at some of our planned subgroup analysis, we found it did prevent multiple falls, so people who fell frequently, and in people who had a fall in the past year, it was also effective there. So it may have been more effective in people who were a little bit frailer, who got benefits just from cognitive training. And that's, I think, one of the few studies that have shown that just a cognitive training program, by improving, cognitive function, may indeed be a fall prevention strategy or a nice component to include. The next one I'm going to describe briefly with just a few results is what we're doing with VR. So this is another new technology, and this time we're trying to simulate what it's like to avoid falls when we're walking down the sidewalk. So again, if I can run this one, this is called Hollow Walk, and we have people walk on a treadmill and they see this. So they're in a virtual world inside this virtual reality setup. They can see both their hands and their feet, and they walk along the pavement, which is scattered with obstacles. They're actually walking on this treadmill. They need to collect apples as a task, avoid the oily surface, and as they do, if they hit an obstacle, the actual walkway will move. So here's the stepping over the can, and that's the idea of it. So what we've done is, as the person walks along the walkway, when there's an obstacle, if they strike it, say it's a tin can, there's a split belt treadmill and it will throw them forward. They're safe in a harness, but it's as if you've hit the tin can. If you step onto a slippery surface, the treadmill will stop and it'll throw you back like it's a slip. So it's synced exactly, and the task of this is to actually start to avoid the obstacles. So pick up your feet to step over the obstacles, and also, make sure you can recover from a slip. So what we found from this is some interesting findings that we looked at. First of all, acceptability. We wanted to know if people thought it was okay, and in terms of difficulty, in scores of out of 20, we found levels of around 6 to 8, which is good, we think, because we wanted people to find it challenging. We didn't want to find 0 or 2. It was at a level that people thought it was a challenge, but not too daunting. The same with anxiety. We needed people to have sort of a level of engagement, and so that it's not too easy or too relaxing. We wanted people to try. Importantly, cyber sickness. It didn't make anyone feel sick or dizzy or nauseous, so that was crucial. And the last one was enjoyment, and we got nearly perfect scores here. People really liked it, and they didn't want to come out of the virtual world. They were disappointed to come out from this lovely cartoony type world. You're walking along, having an enjoyable time. So in terms of the results, we've got some initial studies. We'll be looking at falls in everyday life in the future. But we know that the virtual reality on the treadmill led to significantly fewer obstacle collisions. If we didn't have the treadmill translations, there was no consequence, and people just walked through the tin can. They stepped on the slippery surface. They didn't change their behaviour. But if they got that feedback, they would change their behaviour. And so that was the crucial thing. We really needed those translations to make it feel realistic. So I'm going to go now on, just that's what we're doing, and that's our future. We're looking at other aspects of fall risk. We're looking at wearable technologies to predict falls and other outcomes. We're doing some imaging to look at what's happening with the frontal cortex when we have to make decisions and how that might be involved for people who are overly concerned about falls. So that's some other work that we're doing, but I'll move on now in general to look at the current evidence, and this has all been nicely put together in world guidelines, and with the leading author being Manuel Monteiro Odasso, also from Ontario, but it has really been a major project that's involved nearly 100 people to put all of the evidence together in one book, one online device to be able to really synthesize what we know about fall prevention. And this comes from other really nice resources. There's a Cochrane Library present the best gold standard evidence in terms of bringing the evidence together, and it's been possible to use all the recent Cochrane systematic reviews to bring this together into the one resource. And I'm going to describe now what we know in terms of what works in fall prevention for the community, hospital and residential aged care settings. And I'm going to use a simplified version. We actually used what's called a grade scale, for those who know it, but I've boiled it down into gold bar level evidence. So 1 gold bar, 2 gold bars and 3 gold bars. So 1 gold bar is a good study, but not enough evidence really to say we're definitive. 2 gold bars mean there have been 2 studies. They're both good and they're both saying much the same thing. And then 3 gold bars, which is the high quality evidence, says that there's been multiple trials or really good systematic reviews saying much the same thing. So that's the gold bar level of evidence that I'll present. So what do we know? Well, for the community, I've mentioned it already, but exercise. So exercise with a high to moderate level of balance training. This can be done at home. It can be done in a group setting. Functional balance exercises, the Otago program, Tai Chi, got to be a balanced component to it. Voluntary and reactive step training works, not the same level of evidence, but clearly it's being accrued. Occupational therapy is very important. These are people at higher risk of falls. For example, people who may have just been recently in hospital or have a visual impairment. And it seems to be more than just the making houses safer. It also involves working with a person to make sure they engage safely in their home and conduct good transfers. Cataract surgery, you can imagine why that might work. You can dramatically improve a person's vision very quickly. If you do that, you're removing a visual risk factor for falls. It works even better if you do 2 eyes, because then you get depth perception back, the ability to judge distances and obstacles in everyday life. Multifocals, I'll come to this one a little bit more later, but if people who are regularly go outside only wear single lens glasses instead of their multifocals or bifocals, they have a less chance of falling while they're outside, because the bottom part of the visual field where all the hazards are is no longer blurred. So that's a factor as well. Medications, many studies show that multiple medications increase the risk of falling. So if they can be reviewed and optimized, that's effective in preventing falls. Difficult to do for some drug classes, therefore there's only the 1 bar, but it is possible. And then finally, we're going from head right down to foot. So podiatry, for people who've got disabling foot pain, which can be about 1/3 of older people, if you put in place podiatry interventions, including foot and ankle exercises, so coming back to the exercise again, you can also prevent falls. So 2 gold bars for that one. A few more uncommon conditions, but this is where the cardiovascular side comes in. Pacemakers, where it's appropriate. And then vitamin D. Vitamin D is important not just for bone, but for muscle, for nerve. And so vitamin D supplementation, provided it's not a mega dose, like a 6-monthly or yearly dose, it is shown quite consistently to prevent falls. And then if you put it all together, particularly for people who've got multiple problems, you can on a targeted way for, say, visual problems, etc. So multifactorial interventions, more difficult to do, but it makes sense. You look at the risk factors, you address them. Hospital, there are a number of different strategies, and key factors here are system change and education. So this is a key factor for the hospital. Particularly for people without cognitive impairment, for staff and their families. So if everyone works together, it's been the most effective strategy in hospital. This has been a very difficult area to bring about change. Multifactorial interventions also work, so looking at individual problems, and then those people who are in for an orthopedic problem, such as a fractured hip, if a geriatrician works alongside the orthopedic surgeon, that's also a good way to prevent falls. And finally, residential aged care. Again, people are older, often, and greater levels of frailty, often need a multifactorial or multi-component intervention. Vitamin D again. A big study undertaken recently in Australia found improving the diet worked. So provision of dairy foods to meet calcium and protein by itself was enough to prevent falls in this group. So it's a very encouraging finding. And the final two down the bottom in terms of trying to prevent fall injury, if not falls. So the appropriate bone treatment if a fall occurs, that a fracture won't occur, and hip protectors as well. So they work biomechanically, hard to put into practice, but if people wear them, they tend to work. So that's overall what we know about how to prevent falls. So lots of evidence, and so the next step is how would we put this into practice? So this is the best whys. So what we know all that. How can we do it here and now in everyday life? And so I'm just going to go through some of the options that we could do to look at all of those and bring about effect today. So, if you're an older person, it's involving the family doctor is key. So a big flag and a risk factor, it's a simple one. If someone's fallen last year, they've got a good chance they might fall again in the next year. It is a predictor. So that's something, if you've had a fall, to just mention that to the family doctor. And keep up the visits, of course. Regular visits are important for chronic conditions. And if you have sort of like feelings of unsteadiness, dizziness, nausea, these all can be indicators that something might be able to be looked at to reduce the risk. They're the ways to go, and also ask about what are the strategies for improving balance, and what are the strategies for exercise, and what are available. So that's step one. Talk to the doctor about a fall and hopefully get some good feedback and advice. The next one's about other medical conditions. A podiatrist is very helpful. As I mentioned, there's now good evidence for preventing falls from a podiatrist. This involves, as I mentioned, some simple exercises for the foot and ankle, as well as maintaining the health care of the foot and wearing appropriate shoes. Cataract surgery, I mentioned, very effective in preventing falls. Looking at whether or not vitamin D is an appropriate therapy. Gradual reducing any drugs, psychoactive medications like sleeping tablets or drugs for anxiety. Each study shows that they double the risk of falls, so any strategy to try and reduce the risk is important, and a medical review to make sure medication use is optimal. Okay, the next one is correcting wearable hazards. So these two I'd like to describe as sort of like elective disabilities. So people just choose to have these items. So vision, as I mentioned, the problem with multifocal glasses is they blur the bottom part of the visual field. So if you look at the graph I have on the screen there, you've got single lens vision of a footpath, of a sidewalk, and there's a shadow and an edge. And the edge is the #1 environmental cause of falls. Where one slab of concrete is slightly raised above the other, there's low contrast, it's easy to trip on. On the right side, we've got the same scene, but the bottom part is blurred by the bifocal section, which is designed for reading. It's designed for about arm's length, whereas single lens vision is designed to look at least two steps ahead. And that's where we look as we walk along. We don't look at our feet, we're always looking 2 steps ahead. And so that's a way to minimize the risk. If people are out and about a lot, try and consider a single lens glasses rather than multifocals. Footwear, of course, is also important. You can imagine that unsafe shoes, high heels, shoes that don't fit, that are worn, are going to increase the risk of falls. So they're certainly worth investing in safe shoes. And then the home. So we've gone from the person, obvious hazards should be removed, make sure we clean up slips, etc. Make sure there are handrails as appropriate if people are older and a bit frailer. And then work with an occupational therapist to make sure that a person, everybody is actually maximizing their safety as they get in and around their homes. So there are multiple interventions, but it's not an insurmountable number. It goes from, vision, exercise, looking at medications and the feet. So they're the sorts of things to consider. Finally, I'll talk just a little bit more about exercise because it is key. I mentioned that there need to be multiple components. About the dose, it should be, say, 2 to 3 hours a week. Look at the key components of including balance and also strength and function. How to do it? Well, you can just increase the dose as you go along. There are several ways. You can increase the number of repetitions. You can stand for 30 seconds, but to do that along the way, you start with 10 seconds, 20 seconds, and so on until you can increase the dose. You reduce the support, stand somewhere firm. We've got a firm support, but don't use it, and then try and minimize the use of the hands and so on. Then you can add a task. We looked at the task before of adding a cognitive task, so you can count backwards as you do your balance training, name animals, all sorts of cognitive tasks to make it more challenging. But safety is key. Don't do anything that is not safe, and make sure there's always an appropriate support, and make sure, for example, a family doctor is happy with you doing the programs. Here are some simple examples, standing with feet together, then 1 foot in front of the other, then finally on one leg. So you can see you can make the program more difficult, but always have a support to hold on to. Strength training, getting up out of a chair, side lifts, heel to bum, and then standing up on the toes. So all of these can be worked together, can be done safely at home. So there are the tips. Break them down into short groups, fit examples into everyday life. There's been a nice program undertaken in Sydney where the programs were undertaken while people did things like the washing up, hanging out the washing, getting plates from the lower level of the bottom shelf rather than the top one, and so on. So you can bring exercises into daily activities. Stick with something you enjoy. Don't take on something that bores you, that's repeatable and you don't like. So find an interesting program. And as I mentioned, either talk to a family doctor or a health profession, a physiotherapist or an exercise physiologist too, to help with a program. And of course, exercise has multiple benefits. Many here and many to be named. It helps with chronic diseases such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease. It helps control blood pressure, blood sugar levels, manages pain. It improves cognition and brain health. It improves the way we move, our sleep, our mental health, stress, anxiety, and depression. So it's got all of these other benefits. So fall prevention is really just the catch. You do all of these things to improve your balance, prevent falls, and all of these extra benefits follow. Got a couple of resources here that can be shared, I'm sure. I'm sure there are many in Ontario as well, but these are resources that have all the exercises that you can do. This one's in a very nice booklet that can be downloaded. Another program that comes also with videos, and no need to take the reference, I'm sure can be shared. And also networks. So this is the one we have in New South Wales, which has multiple suggestions and tips about how to prevent falls beyond exercise. So there are a range of different strategies to use. So what I guess like to conclude by saying is there is a way to really go from doing new research to make sure that it gets put into evidence, then into guidelines and systematic reviews, and finally into practice. And we're at a stage now, I suppose the research is mature, we can really make some practical tips to how people can prevent falls. We're just finally finishing up with a couple of ads, while I've got the chance. If anyone needs an excuse to come to Sydney, November is the time when we're running our Fall Prevention Congress. And the next one too, where there's a world initiative too, that's looking at the world guidelines, but also holding meetings. And that will be next year in Manchester in June. So I'll finish it up there, and thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Stephen, for a wonderful talk. We're going to open up for some questions and discussion. Are there questions from the audience? There's a question there. I'll bring the mic. Oh, okay.
I think it's on yet.
I guess I have to be careful if I don't fall from that.
Thank you so much. That was awesome. We've come to a bunch of these MIRA lectures, and yet another spectacular thing that will affect us tomorrow as we make changes. Did you have any chance to look at the effect of internal locus of control versus external locus of control? So if it's me making a decision about engaging in these activities to prevent falls, does that change the outcome versus my family telling me I have to do this, or a doctor telling me I have to do this? Like, is there any evidence around whether that makes a difference to the actual reduction?
Yeah. I think the question was about what the internal locus of control versus external. I think the closest we got, we've looked at perceived falls risk and perceived balance. It's the closest we've come to looking at that aspect, and concern about falling. And so we're trying to understand those two to see if there's actually disparities between actual fall risks that we measure it by, say, a balance test, and how people feel their balance is, and whether we get people who are overly concerned or possibly too confident. And we find that if you are off that, if they don't align, it can increase the risk of falls. The only other thing I'd say in terms of concern about falling is the intervention I mentioned about the step training program. If you can actually improve a person's balance, it's often followed with increased confidence and less concern about falling. I don't think I've probably directly answered your question, but hopefully it's a little bit close.
Got one back here.
Thank you very much for the wonderful talk. I'm Lisa Carlesso. I'm in rehabilitation sciences here at McMaster. Just wondering if you've looked at the effectiveness of the interventions when someone has already had a fall on recurrent falls. And then the follow-up to that is whether you've also looked at comorbid conditions and the influence of various disease processes and the rate of falls and the effectiveness of the interventions.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, we typically do subgroup analyses. I think the question is, do the intervention work with people who've already suffered falls? And they do, basically. There's good evidence that people who they're at increased risk, and they benefit at least as much as the general community of people who you could categorize who haven't fallen and who have. So definitely. And there's a whole lot of evidence in that systematic review and in the guidelines about subgroups and the role that exercise can play for those and also other interventions. And that's groups such as those with Parkinson's disease, those who've got mild cognitive impairment and indeed dementia, and a number of other factors. And different exercise programs, different fall prevention strategies are effective there. So it seems to be for everyone. So not just fit and able people in the community, but also for those with balance impairments and a range of chronic conditions.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this very much.
Thank you.
I wanted to give you my personal experience with balance, dizziness, staggering. When I eat simple carbohydrates, I begin to stagger, brain fog, as if I'm drunk. So I went to the Google and what causes dizziness and staggering with simple carbohydrates, and I came up with Brewer's syndrome. The stomach takes the sugar and simple carbohydrates and ferments it into methyl hydrate, and I become intoxicated. And the remedy is I fast for 48 hours, and it goes away. I was surprised that all the extensive research that you've done, and it didn't come up. Has anyone heard of this Brewer's syndrome?
Yeah, I must admit this is about fast uptake simple carbs, leading to sort of like, in essence, a feeling of intoxication, is as you would describe it.
Yeah.
And as a result, maybe increased fall risk. I'm not sure of any research on that, but it's certainly,
It's interesting.
It's very interesting. Yeah.
Thank you.
Follow it up.
Okay.
There's some few questions back there. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Doctor. My question is regarding the increase in vertigo over the last 20 years, and how has that impacted the risk of falls? And if it has, have we found anything to prevent vertigo?
Vertigo and dizziness are one of the big puzzles, not just in fall prevention, just in medicine. They're probably multifactorial, multi-causal. We tried to tease this out in a recent study by looking at people who complained of dizziness. And we wanted to develop a non-stop shop for dizziness. And so we had assessments of balance, we had specific assessments of the vestibular system, we had assessments of cardiovascular functioning, we had assessments of anxiety. And what we found is by tailoring that, we could pinpoint something we thought was the cause in most cases, and put in place a strategy for addressing vestibular issues and so on. I think that is a good way to look because of the multifactorial causes. The other issue, of course, is it's intermittent, so someone doesn't have the problem all the time. So we could test people and they were fine, yet they would complain of dizziness. So it's something that requires careful consideration and looking at many different factors and trying to tease out the problem. It's possible in many cases to find a solution. Some people remain elusive. We can't find anything wrong, but the problem is there.
Got one at the back here.
There's one at the back and then one up here.
Just a question.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you for the question. The question was, can I get one of those exercise pads? Sorry. Sorry, dear. Just joking on my lunch. I thought that I might get this question if I can recover. We're working on it really quickly. I almost fear by mentioning it because people want them now. We've got to work with a commercial company who can do it properly, And watch this space. We really want to try and make these available. There is no point at all in doing our research, finding a good result, and not rolling it out. So we're going to do it. So not immediately, but it's my priority when I go back to actually work with my colleagues to make sure this happens and we can make them available, not just in Australia, but everywhere.
Got one in the back corner here.
Just a question. I like to do water fit, preferably to the outdoor stuff. So I can see how, like I was talking to my doctor and he said, no, you have to do the outside walking. And I thought, okay, but I don't get as much of it because I don't enjoy it as much. What is the difference between the two of them, or have there been any studies to do that?
Did you get the question?
I think the question was, if I heard the first part. Audrey, you want to repeat the question?
Aquafit or water fit, so doing exercises in the pool, and the trade-off between enjoying that very much and not being outside and walking around.
What's the question about aqua fitness? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. All exercises are good. Aqua fitness is fantastic for things, stabilizing balance. It's good for people with joint pain and so on. There's no evidence, though, for falls that on dry land where we are, that it prevents falls. Exercise is very task specific, and to get all the benefits for fall prevention, as I mentioned, it needs to mimic what we do in everyday life. Don't stop the aqua fitness, it's got all the benefits, but try and build some land-based exercise in as well.
Two here.
Hello. I have a question. It's a technical curiosity that relates to a nasty fall I had in the last winter. In your research, and because you do, I suppose, several brain scans, are we able to explain, clearly explain, what happens when a person inside the brain, when a person is about to experience a fall? I'm asking you this question is because how much time do we have to respond to a fall that's about to happen? I'm asking you this question because during the last Canadian winter, I was walking on the sidewalk and I hit black ice and I went totally airborne horizontally. But for a few milliseconds, I felt like it was floating or levitating. And this gave me an extra millisecond to move my arms and to hit the ground with one of my hands. It would have been catastrophic. So it's a question about the brain scans and what do we know and so on. Thank you.
Okay, I think the question mainly relates is how much time do we have to do something if we trip and slip? Is there time to do anything to avoid a fall? And the short answer is, in many cases, yes. There is sufficient time to be able to take a proactive step. So if some work I didn't show today that's related to that treadmill training, where if you subject people to trips and slips, they actually are less likely to fall. They learn to lift the foot quickly and step over the obstacle, or slide through the slip hazard, or take another quick step. It is possible. There are certain circumstances I think nobody would recover. If you just happen to be in black ice and it's immediate, people are going to fall. But that's kind of like an extreme external event. But in many less extreme circumstances, in and around the home, where the slips are not so intense, the trips are not so intense, you can do it. There is time.
Stephen, related to that question was, do we understand what happens in the brain from a mechanistic point of view when somebody's falling? Is there a certain sort of response we see when you do brain imaging studies?
There is. The question here is, what are the mechanisms? And the mechanisms go right from the brain and the frontal cortex about planning, right down to the EMG response. So we actually, in our slip and trip training, we're getting faster and more accurate responses at the level of the muscle. So it goes right through from the muscle to cognitive planning, right through the frontal cortex. Planning is key. How we fall is also important. If people have been playing rugby, football, volleyball, martial arts, they fall better. And this is something that may stay with them all their lives. It's a strategy. The worst thing that can happen is no protective response when people fall onto their heads. And so that's the other thing. Even if a fall is not avoided completely, the injury might be removed because a person falls in a safe manner. So it's all over the way.
Got a question. Good afternoon. I'm wondering what the evidence is around dance programs when you're following kind of an instructor in the dance moves. It seems to me it's quite similar to some of the the program that you developed.
Yeah. So far, the evidence, it's not on my list, unfortunately, because there have been a few what we call negative trials. So they've looked at dance and have not been sufficiently powerful enough to prevent falls. We've had some programs where I was actually involved in one, and it didn't work quite as well as possible because some of the more frailer people when they picked their dance partner, picked someone steady, and they lent on them throughout the program to provide the support, not under their own steam. Now that's just one example, but I clearly it does. All sorts of programs like different types of dances may well have all of the components of step training. More work is needed, so I think it's still an absence of evidence still rather than really to demonstrate it doesn't work. We need more studies.
Yes. Thank you. This has been very interesting. I have a walking group, and in my walking group, because we walk on country roads, everyone was very concerned about falling. So I decided through my yoga instructor, who is a martial art black belt, I said, can you show us how to fall? And she did. She arrived with a mat. We did not practice because it wasn't safe, but she demonstrated to us and gave us simple instructions about falling and preventing the worst case damage situation, your head. And it was very helpful. I've never seen anyone offer this. Perhaps that might be something that we would look into. She recommended we practice on our bed because she said you will get muscle memory. When you go to fall, if you know how to fall and you've practiced it, that few seconds you have as you're falling will help you remember, and your muscles remember just how to fall a little bit more accurately. And her tips were amazing.
It's true. There are in fact 5 research trials that have shown that you can train up corrective responses to prevent injuries in the case of a fall. They nearly all rely on martial arts techniques, and there are things like slapping the hand down to taking the risk, even a roll, falls straight down rather than forwards. All strategies. If you look at people like volleyballers, they fall all the time and never are injured because the way they fall, they absorb the weight. It is trainable. The tricky thing is training people who might injure themselves and such techniques of trying to throw themselves onto the floor. Therein lies the barrier. It's been done mostly in more fit older people so far and young people. So it's a matter of, well, if you're going to do it, definitely do it somewhere safe like a bed. But I'd do it, more under supervision.
There was a question here.
Thank you, Dr. Lord, for a very interesting presentation. And while you talked and showed us a number of very interesting slides, it occurred to me that I thought we should give credit to the staff of McMaster University's kinesiology department, because several months ago I called up the office of PACE, which everybody here should know stands for the what's the stand? Senior amnesia. Thank you. This always happens when I start to talk. the Physical Activity Center for Excellence. That's the program that actually everybody here should know about. I asked the physiotherapist to give me a full physical and propose a program for an 80-year-old with a couple of heart conditions. And she did. And what she gave me was essentially all the exercise, among other things, all the exercises that you presented and told us about today. So kudos to you for your confirmation of what's already going on at MAC. Thank you very much.
Just as a comment, what I think now, because we've got these guidelines, we've got this evidence, everyone's talking on the same page now. So when it comes to fall prevention, right around the world, what I find is people are giving the same message, which is really good. The last thing to do is give mixed messages and inconsistent advice. So I think that's great.
Is there another question? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I hope during your visit to Canada, you've had the opportunity to visit with the SEAL operation at the Toronto Rehab Hospital as well. The Toronto Rehab Institute has some really interesting results in terms of falls, how we fall, etc. I'm sure you're working with them.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
Out of curiosity, hi. Suzanne, you have orchestrated a huge amount of the development of what we're seeing today. What was it that called you to fulfill this need that was so strong? Could I ask that, please?
Thank you. It's actually quite simple. It was an interesting one. I had a chunk of money that my mother had sort of given me, and I said, "Do you want me to save it for the grandchildren?" And she said, "No, because I don't have children." She said, "Choose something that interests you and work on it." He said, find something that interests you and spend it doing something with it. So I sort of looked around, and I was on the board of governors of McMaster at the time, and my father was a graduate from McMaster, and my mother had been involved in aging issues in Ottawa. And I'd lived in Ottawa, and we would go out for dinner every Friday night. And since I had no children, we actually talked about real things like aging. And so I thought, okay, I'll do a chair in aging at McMaster. And so that started it. And then they introduced me to Parminder. And that was devastating because his vision for what he thought McMaster could do was overwhelming. And I thought, I want to be part of this. And so there it goes from, through the family of you give back to the community, and then a person with vision who can create something. And here we are.
Good afternoon, and first of all, thank you so much for a very interesting and informative discussion, and to McMaster for putting this together and bringing us here. My question is, are there any resources or programs that we have access to that can get us involved in some of the exercises that you mentioned, so that hopefully we can keep our balance and not fall around? Thank you.
Okay. There are lots of resources, web-based, and there are some links here, but maybe I could defer to someone from Ontario who might be able to know more in what we have available in the community.
Yeah, so we're going to post after this talk, we're going to post all the resources that Dr. Lord shared with us today. And we'll have some links to what's available kind of in Ontario. We do need to do better in terms of having more fall prevention programs that are accessible and available. And it's something I guess I want to say stay tuned, because as an institute, it's something that we're really thinking about, is how we can make these programs more, offer some programs for fall prevention right within the Institute for Research on Aging. So please stay tuned, but we will make all of this available. Thank you.
Thank you, Marla. Oh, there's a question back.
This isn't a question, but something that my wife and I just discovered. I was going to Sackville Senior Center, and we went as a result of a MIRA talk. Dr. Meredith Hill was talking about motivation for exercise. Some of you might have gone to that. We didn't realize that the senior centers existed to the extent that they did, and we started exercise programs there. And a lot of those exercise programs geared to seniors are actually doing, whether it's boot camp or cardio dance or whatever, have these components in it. So kudos to Mac for bringing us up to Sackville, and to Hamilton for incorporating this within.
Great. I think this is a good time to stop. We've had a wonderful engagement from our audiences here, and I again want to take time to say thank you to Stephen for giving a wonderful presentation and traveling to Canada from Australia. Hopefully we start new and emerging collaborations between here and Sydney and see what we can do together. Thank you very much.